Elara Voss stood at the prow of the flagship, the wind tugging at her braid as her sharp eyes scanned the horizon. The distant silhouettes of airships coalesced like shadows drawn on a canvas, signaling the inevitable convergence of allies and enemies alike. The low rumble of thunder underscored the restless tension that gripped the fleet. Around her, the crew moved with purpose, their faces taut with anticipation. Torrent Vex barked orders, his broad frame a reassuring presence as he coordinated the fortification of defenses. The clang of metal and the hiss of airship engines wove into the symphony of preparation. Elara's heart beat in time with the rising storm, the weight of leadership pressing heavily upon her. Below deck, the strategy room was a crucible of conflicting wills. Garrick Thorne leaned over a holographic map, his sun-bleached hair tousled from hours of restless planning. Mira Solon stood opposite him, her pale fingers tracing ancient runes and schematics, her voice calm yet insistent. "We need to consider the technological edge we possess," Mira argued, her silver hair catching the dim light. "Kale's fleet relies on brute force and numbers, but if we can exploit the lost Skyland's energy conduits, we can disrupt their formations." Garrick's eyes flashed with impatience. "All well and good, but when the cannons start firing, we need pilots ready to take aggressive maneuvers. We can't just sit behind fancy tech and wait to get blown out of the sky." Elara listened, weighing their perspectives. This was the crucible of leadership, balancing impulsive courage with calculated strategy. She cleared her throat, drawing their attention. "We'll integrate both. Mira, prepare your engineers to deploy the energy disruptors. Yarek, coordinate with pilots to execute tactical strikes that exploit those disruptions. Our strength is in unity, not just of firepower, but of mind and will." The room settled into focused activity, the crew moving to their stations with renewed purpose. Torrent Vex's patrols grew more frequent, his piercing blue eyes catching every flicker of movement in the corridors. His scarred face was a map of battles past, a silent promise that he would protect the crew from threats seen and unseen. In the communications bay, Lena Oris's fingers danced over the consoles. The glow of screens illuminated her focused expression as she intercepted coded transmissions from Kale's fleet. Her voice, steady and precise, relayed vital intelligence to Elara. "They're coordinating an assault on the eastern flank. Reinforcements are inbound from the northern isles. Their mercenary forces have increased by 30%. Elara absorbed the information, her mind racing through contingencies. The political landscape of Skyfold had become a volatile storm itself, shifting alliances, betrayals, and ambitions as unpredictable as the air currents that shaped their journey. Yet, within this chaos, Elara found a thread of hope, a chance to forge a new order from the fractured sky. As the fleet tightened its formations, the first raindrops fell, cold and sharp against steel decks. The gathering gale was more than a weather phenomenon. It was the prelude to a battle that would decide the fate of Skyfold's contested territories. Elara's gaze hardened, her resolve crystallizing. She had come too far to let the shadows of the past define her future. "Prepare for engagement," she commanded, her voice cutting through the mounting storm. "We fight not just for land, but for the promise of what Skyfold can become." The airships hummed with energy, the crew bracing for the imminent clash. Somewhere beyond the clouds, Captain Riven Kale's fleet advanced, a looming tempest of steel and fire. Yet in the heart of the gathering gale, Elara found the calm before the storm, a moment to steel herself and her crew for the trials to come. The horizon darkened as the first flashes of enemy fire lit the sky. The battle for Skyfold was about to begin. and Elara Voss would lead her people through the tumult with fierce determination and unyielding hope. The wind howled, carrying with it the echoes of past sacrifices and the promise of new beginnings. In the heart of the storm, the fate of the floating continent hung in the balance, and Elara's campaign was far from over. Her eyes narrowed against the rain, staring into the gathering gale. "This is our moment," she whispered, "and we will not falter." As the first cannonball screamed through the storm, the fleet surged forward, united, resolute, and ready. Elara Voss crouched low behind a crumbling archway, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon where faint glimmers of Kale's fleet flickered in the dying light. Beside her, Yarrick Thorn adjusted the straps on his leather harness, the weight of his pistol a familiar comfort against the unknown dangers lurking in the enemy's domain. "You sure this is the place?" Yarrick whispered, his voice rough but steady. Elara nodded, unfolding a worn, star-flecked map. "Intelligence from Lena's intercepted messages matches this location. Kale's outpost should be hidden within these ruins." The two exchanged a glance, a mix of determination and unease. The mission was perilous: slip behind enemy lines, gather intelligence on Kale's mercenary alliances, and return undetected. Failure meant capture or death, but the stakes were too high to hesitate. Sliding silently through the tangled undergrowth of twisted metal and shattered stone, Elara's breath came steady despite the pounding in her chest. Memories of past failures flickered behind her eyes, but she pushed them away, focusing on the mission. Garrick's presence was a bomb, brash and confident, yet fiercely loyal. A reminder that trust could still be forged even in the most fractured alliances. A low hum vibrated through the air, growing louder as they neared the heart of the ruins. Elara's gaze locked on a cluster of faint red lights pulsing behind a partially collapsed wall. She signaled for Yarrick to halt. Peering cautiously around the edge, they saw a war room bathed in dim, flickering light. Holomaps projected in mid-air displayed clusters of red markers, fleets, strongholds, and mercenary camps. At the center stood Captain Riven Kale himself, tall and imposing, his cold grey eyes scanning the maps with ruthless calculation. His mechanical arm tapped rhythmically against the table, a metallic echo underscoring the quiet menace of the scene. "So, the great Kale's ambitions are larger than we imagined," Yarrick muttered, voice barely audible. Elara's mind raced as she absorbed the details. Kale was not merely building a pirate fleet. He was orchestrating an empire with mercenary reinforcements and political backers from rival factions. The fragile balance of power in Skyfold was about to shatter. Suddenly, a sharp crackling noise interrupted the tense silence, a faint alarm triggered by a careless movement. Elara and Yarrick froze, then darted back into the shadows as guards surged toward the war room. "Time to move," Elara hissed, grabbing Yarrick's arm. They sprinted through the ruins, the night swallowing their desperate flight. Behind them, the roar of engines and the sharp staccato of gunfire echoed, the enemy's pursuit relentless. Above, thunder rumbled, and a violent storm began to roll in, lightning fracturing the sky in jagged ribbons of white. Back aboard their airship, Myra, Solon, and Lena Oris worked feverishly in the cramped communications bay, their faces illuminated by the glow of monitors displaying intercepted messages. Each decoded transmission revealed new layers of Kale's alliances, from mercenary contracts to political scheming, deepening the danger confronting the expedition. "This isn't just a pirate war," Myra said, her voice tight with urgency. "It's a full-scale power play with backers who want control of the skies." Lena nodded, fingers dancing over the console. We need to get this intel to Elara and Yorick before Kale tightens his grip. As the storm battered their ship, Elara and Yorick returned, soaked and breathless, but alive. The weight of what they had uncovered settled heavily on them. Kale's reach is wider than we thought, Elara said, eyes blazing with renewed resolve. We're running out of time. Yorick cracked a rare, grim smile. Then it's time we show him what we're made of. The chapter closed on the roaring storm and a fleet bracing for the coming tempest. A battle not only for territory, but for the soul of Skyfold itself. The shadows of betrayal and ambition stretched long across the skies, and Elara stood ready to face them, her resolve steeled by the flight through darkness. Elara Voss stood rigid, her sharp eyes fixed on the man across the small briefing table. The faint hum of the engines beneath the deck and the distant groan of shifting clouds outside the viewport formed a backdrop to a storm, far more volatile than the one gathering in the skies. Yorick Thorn, his sun-bleached hair tousled, and his signature scar cutting a harsh line over his left eye, leaned forward, his voice low but fierce. You don't see the bigger picture, Elara. Your cautious plans won't hold when Kale's fleet comes down on us like a thunderbolt. Elara's jaw tightened, and your reckless bravado won't keep us alive. We need strategy, not blind charges. The air between them crackled with years of unspoken grievances, the friction of two leaders forced to share command but divided by past wounds and diverging philosophies. Around them, the crew waited, the fragile trust they had built hanging by a thread. You think I'm reckless? Garrick's voice sharpened. I'm the one who's kept this crew alive through every raid and skirmish. Your navigation skills are wasted if you can't adapt when the storm hits. Elara's eyes flickered with pain, memories of her catastrophic failure flashing unbidden. Adaptation without caution is suicide. I won't lose more lives because you can't see beyond your ego. The argument spiraled, voices rising, cutting through the usual hum of the ship's machinery. Myra Solon, sitting quietly at her bench nearby, clutched a small wrench, her pale fingers trembling slightly. She glanced between the two, the storm of their discord threatening to drown the fragile progress they had made. The soft, metallic clinks of her tools punctuated the silence that fell briefly when their tempers cooled, only to flare again moments later. Tauren, Vex, broad-shouldered and scarred, stood near the hatch, his piercing blue eyes scanning the restless crew. His presence was an anchor, a reminder that amidst the discord, the mission must continue. Yet even he could feel the tension in the air, the thin line between order and chaos bending dangerously close to breaking. In the galley, Lena Oris sat before an array of signal devices, her fingers deftly manipulating dials and switches. The flickering lantern light cast shadows across her focused face as she intercepted a coded transmission. The message, urgent and coded in a cipher only she could crack, revealed movements of Captain Riven Kale's fleet, closing in faster than anticipated. Her breath caught. This was no time for internal strife. She moved swiftly to the briefing room, the intercepted data clutched in her hands. Elara, she called softly, stepping into the charged atmosphere. We have incoming. Kale's fleet is advancing, and they're closer than we thought. The room fell silent, the gravity of Lena's news grounding the heated argument. Elara and Yorick exchanged a long, tense look. Adversaries by circumstance, but allies by necessity. We don't have time for this, Elara said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. If we fracture now, we lose everything. Yorick nodded curtly, the fire in his eyes dimming just enough to reveal the reluctant respect beneath. Agreed, but once this is over, we settled the score. The crew rallied, the fractured bonds held together by the imminent threat looming on the horizon. Yet beneath the surface, the scars of broken trust ran deep, threatening to undo everything they had fought for. As the flagship surged forward into the churning clouds, the storm outside mirrored the storm within, a tempest of fear, anger, hope, and determination. The fate of Skyfold's lost skylands balanced precariously on the edge of a knife, and the fragile alliance between Elara and Yarek would prove the decisive factor in the battle to come. But the question lingered in the charged air: could they truly unite? Or would their broken bonds shatter the expedition before the first shot was fired? The skies darkened, the first rumbles of battle echoing through the clouds. And somewhere deep within the heart of the flagship, Elara Voss closed her eyes briefly, summoning the courage to lead, not just against the enemy, but against the doubts threatening to consume her from within. The campaign was far from over. The true test was only beginning. Outside, the wind howled, buffeting the airships as they prepared for the coming storm. Somewhere in the distance, the faint glint of enemy sails caught the last rays of dying light. The broken bonds aboard the flagship were a mirror to the fractured skies around them, a chaotic dance of shadows and light, danger and hope. And amidst it all, Elara and Yarek stood poised on the edge of war, their fates intertwined in a fragile, uncertain alliance. The dawn of Skyfold's future was still unwritten, and the skies awaited their champions. Elara Voss stood at the prow of the lead airship, her dark eyes scanning the horizon where the long-lost skyland emerged like a spectral monolith. Jagged spires of ancient metal jutted from the cloud cover, crowned with corroded towers that gleamed faintly in the shifting light. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the faint hum of latent energy that seemed to pulse from the floating landmass itself. Around her, the crew moved with a palpable mixture of reverence and urgency, the weight of their discovery settling heavily on each soul. "There it is," Elara whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Her voice was steady, but beneath it thrummed a current of awe and cautious hope. The lost skyland. Yarek Thorn paced beside her, his sun-bleached hair tousled by the brisk sky currents. His usual brash grin was tempered by a rare seriousness as he surveyed the terrain. "Never thought I'd see it with my own eyes. Feels like the end of a legend, or the start of something worse." Elara met his gaze, acknowledging the truth in his words. The Skyland held power, and with power came danger. But it was the prize they had sought through countless storms, betrayals, and narrow escapes. They had come too far to turn back now. As the fleet settled into a cautious orbit, Myra Solon moved swiftly across the deck of the lead ship, clutching her worn satchel brimming with delicate instruments. Her pale fingers were steady despite the excitement bubbling beneath her calm exterior. "I need to get down there," she said, voice firm. "There's technology here ancient, but not dead. If we can awaken it, it might give us the edge we need." Tauren Vex, standing nearby with his imposing frame silhouetted against the cloud-scattered sky, nodded gruffly. "I'll cover you. This place won't be unguarded for long." Elara placed a hand on Myra's shoulder. "Be careful. We don't know what's still active or what might trigger defenses." The landing on the lost Skyland was surreal. Their airships touched down on a vast, circular platform, its surface etched with intricate patterns that glowed faintly beneath layers of dust and moss. The air was cooler here, tinged with a metallic temps that hinted at the dormant power coursing through the ancient structure. Strange aerial plants swayed in the mild breeze, their translucent leaves refracting the pale sunlight into scattered rainbows. Mira immediately set to work, her tools clicking softly as she examined a device embedded in the platform's Centaura crystalline orb, surrounded by delicate filaments of metal. The orb pulsed rhythmically, responding to her touch with a low hum that vibrated through the stone beneath their feet. Around her, the crew maintained a tense perimeter. Yarrick and Torin patrolled the edges, their eyes sharp for any sign of intrusion. The distant rumble of shifting clouds signaled an approaching storm, a reminder that time was not on their side. Inside the Skyland's control chamber, Elara and Kess, Marlowe, pored over ancient star maps projected onto translucent panels. The walls themselves seemed alive, pulsing faintly with energy as if the land itself was awakening. Kess pointed excitedly to a constellation that aligned perfectly with the controls. "This could be it," she whispered, eyes wide with wonder. "A navigation system, or maybe a power source." Elara's fingers traced the glowing map, her mind racing. The weight of her past failures pressed on her, but here, in this moment, she felt a surge of clarity and resolve. "If we can harness this," she said, voice steady, "we don't just reclaim lost land, we change the entire game." But as the storm clouds thickened and the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the ancient stones, the crew knew their triumph was only the beginning. Rival factions would soon converge, drawn by the promise of power. The fragile piece of Skyfold hung in the balance. Elara took a deep breath, steeling herself. The lost Skyland was theirs for now. But the true challenge lay ahead, holding on to it. "Prepare for possible hostilities," she ordered, her voice carrying the weight of command. "We hold this ground, come what may." The crew moved with renewed purpose, the hum of ancient technology mingling with the creak of airships and the distant roar of thunder. Above them, the skies of Skyfold shifted and churned, a vast, unpredictable frontier waiting to be conquered. And Elara Voss stood ready, a leader reborn among the clouds, her past mistakes etched into her resolve as clearly as the stars that guided her way. The lost Skyland was more than a prize, it was a crucible, and the campaign was far from over. As night fell, the first distant lights of approaching fleets flickered on the horizon, heralding the storm to come. Elara's gaze hardened. Let them come. The battle for Skyfold's future was about to begin. Elara Voss moved deliberately along the main deck of the flagship, her boots making soft thuds on weathered wood. The sky was a tumult of deep purples fading into fiery orange streaks, the storm clouds gathering ominously beyond the horizon. Every creak of rigging, every whisper of wind through the sails, carried the weight of anticipation, the calm before a storm that would decide their fate. Her gaze swept the fleet arrayed around the strategic Skyland they had claimed just days prior. Airships of varied design and origin clustered like wary predators, their crews busy with hurried preparations. The scent of ozone mingled with the salt temps of high altitudes and the faint metallic temps of weapons being readied. Elara's mind raced through the tactical considerations. But beneath the surface, a knot of anxiety tightened, not for the mission's success, but for the fragile human bonds that held this motley crew together. She turned as footsteps approached, the familiar, confident stride of Yarrick Thorne cutting through the tense atmosphere. His sun-bleached hair was tousled from hours spent atop rigging, and the scar over his left eye seemed to deepen in the fading light. "Storm's coming," he said, voice roughened by fatigue and resolve. "We've got to be ready for more than just weather. Kale won't wait for us to catch our breath." Elara nodded. "I know, that's why every plank, every cannon, every shield has to be as ready as the crew behind it." Together, they moved toward the armory, where Torin, Vex, and several crew members were reinforcing armor plating on the hulls. Torrin's broad shoulders flexed with effort, a scar across his cheek catching the last rays of sun. His gruff demeanor softened when Yarrick clapped him on the back. If Cale shows up thinking he can just waltz in, he's in for a surprise. Torrin grunted in agreement. We'll hold the line. No one's getting through on my watch. The camaraderie between the two men, forged in battles past, was a pillar of strength for the crew. Yet Elara sensed the undercurrent of tension, unspoken doubts about the odds stacked against them, the unpredictability of the shifting skies and shifting loyalties. In the cramped engineering bay, Myra Solin sat surrounded by a cluster of strange, ancient devices. Her pale skin almost glowed in the flickering lamplight, her short silver hair framing a face taut with concentration. Fingers danced across controls, eliciting faint hums and soft pulses of light. She looked up as Elara entered. This technology, Mira began, her voice low but urgent, could give us an edge, a way to manipulate the air currents, to shield us from the worst of Cale's assaults. But it's unstable, and we don't fully understand its limits. Elara studied the glowing schematics. It's a risk we have to take. Every advantage counts. Myra nodded, eyes bright with hope, despite the pressure. I'll have it ready before dawn. Meanwhile, in the communications hub, Lena Oris sat before a bank of signal interceptors, her fingers flying over dials and switches. The air was thick with static and the distant roar of the approaching storm. Her eyes scanned shifting codes and intercepted transmissions, her focus razor sharp. They're moving faster than we thought, Lena reported, voice steady but tense. Cale's fleet is already within striking distance. We've got less time than expected. Elara's jaw tightened. Alert the fleet. Every ship on high alert. We hold this skyland at all costs. As night deepened and the storm clouds thickened, the fleet became a hive of purposeful activity. Crews checked weapons, secured cargo, and exchanged terse words filled with unspoken fears and fragile hopes. Elara found herself standing apart for a moment, staring into the swirling dark above, feeling the weight of every soul depending on her. Kes Marlowe approached quietly, eyes wide but determined. Captain, I've been reviewing the navigation routes again. If we use the thermal updrafts here, she pointed on a map, we might gain an altitude advantage during the battle. Elara smiled faintly, placing a hand on the young apprentice's shoulder. Good thinking, Kes. That kind of insight might just tip the scales. The night air grew colder, the storm's first rumbles echoing through the rigging. Elara took a steadying breath, pushing back the shadows of doubt. This was the moment they had prepared for, the crucible that would test every skill, every bond, every sacrifice. As the fleet settled into defensive formations, a distant flash of lightning illuminated the sky. The battle for Skyfold's future was about to begin. But in the quiet moments, beneath the roar of the storm and the clamor of preparation, Elara knew the fight was as much within as without. The fragile alliances, the unspoken fears, the ghosts of past mistakes, all converged in this moment of reckoning. And as the first raindrops began to fall, she steeled herself. Whatever came next, she would face it with every ounce of courage and cunning she possessed. The dawn might bring victory, or it might bring ruin, but Elara Voss would not go down without a fight. The Stormbreakers were ready.